All right, let's jump right into this explainer and look at a mystery that literally sounds like it was pulled straight out of a Hollywood movie. We're talking about a massive, unbelievable fortune supposedly buried somewhere out in the Virginia countryside. Picture this: rolling green hills that might actually be hiding a secret that has completely baffled cryptographers and treasure hunters for well over a century. Welcome to the absolute enigma that is the Beale Ciphers, what a lot of folks consider to be America's greatest treasure mystery. So, to really unravel this whole thing, we've got to start with the most obvious question. Who exactly was Thomas J. Beale? The legend paints him as this rugged, adventurous frontiersman who just happened to stumble upon something truly extraordinary. But here's the kicker. When you look at the actual historical records, the guy is basically a ghost. So we have to ask ourselves, was he a real person, a clever pseudonym, or maybe the mastermind behind an insanely elaborate hoax? Which brings us right to our next major question. Did he actually bury a massive treasure? Now, keep in mind, we're navigating a famous legend here, not hard documented facts. But the traditional story, it insists that an absolutely mind-boggling amount of wealth was put into the earth, just sitting there, waiting for the right person with a shovel to come along. And if that treasure actually is real, we've got to figure out who wrote the mysterious documents that were left behind. Were they Beale's actual careful instructions meant for his heirs? Or are we just looking at a really complex cryptographic game played by some unknown mastermind who just wanted to mess with people? And this right here is the ultimate hook for treasure hunters everywhere. Can these famous ciphers actually point us to the exact hidden location? I mean, the idea that a random sequence of numbers could literally act as an X marks the spot, well, that's exactly the kind of thing that keeps people up at night, right? To really grasp how this legend took off, you have to put yourself back in the early 19th century United States. It was an era completely defined by frontier travel, wild mining claims, and just massive stretches of uncharted territory. It was this rugged, unpredictable setting where people were literally making overnight fortunes. So honestly, it was the absolute perfect soil for a wild, tall tale like Beale's to grow and thrive. Let's map out this alleged journey. The story goes that Beale and his companions headed deep into the southwestern frontier back in the early 1800s. And out there, they supposedly struck an absolute monster vein of gold and silver. Realizing just how incredibly dangerous it was to carry that kind of haul, they hauled it all the way back east and secretly buried the whole astonishing fortune somewhere in the dirt of Bedford County, Virginia. Now, what really grounds this whole legend and makes it feel real is a physical object. Specifically, a heavy locked iron box that was left at the Washington Hotel in Lynchburg, Virginia. This wasn't just some campfire story that got passed around. Beale supposedly left this actual box behind, promising he returned for it or at least send instructions. I mean, it is the ultimate cinematic setup, isn't it? The mysterious stranger leaves town, leaving behind a locked box that supposedly holds the key to his staggering fortune. So according to this story, he entrusted this heavy box to a guy named Robert Morris, who was a highly respected local proprietor. Fast forward a bunch of years, and Beale never returns. Eventually, Morris decides he's waited long enough. He forces the lock open, and in doing so, he ignites a mystery that is literally still burning brightly today. Inside that box, Morse allegedly found 3 encrypted documents that held the most absolutely crucial details. Along with a few letters written in plain English, just kind of explaining the situation, there were 3 pages completely covered in nothing but numbers. Beale's letters claimed that document number 1 described exactly where the treasure was buried. Document number 2 laid out exactly what the treasure consisted of, and document number 3 listed the names and addresses of the rightful owners, the companions who had actually helped him dig up the gold. Now, at first glance, these pages were just a dizzying, completely impossible wall of numbers. It looked like pure gibberish. But after years of dead ends, a famous breakthrough was supposedly made on cipher number 2. An unknown friend of Morris's managed to stumble upon the key, and it revealed an encryption method that was actually incredibly elegant. The really crucial thing to understand here is the mechanics of what's called a book cipher, because that's exactly how this second paper was allegedly decoded. Instead of just swapping one letter for another like a simple code, a book cipher relies on a shared text. So think like a dictionary, a specific novel, or a historical document. The person writing the code numbers all the words in that reference text. Then the numbers in the cipher simply point you to the corresponding word in that book. And here's the catch. If you don't know which book they used, the code is essentially unbreakable. But here is how they supposedly cracked it. They relied on none other than the Declaration of Independence. It's actually a pretty simple, albeit tedious process. If the cipher read 14, you'd go to the declaration, count all the way to the 14th word, and extract its first letter. By doing this over and over, number by number, a chillingly clear message finally started to emerge from all that numerical noise. Now, we always have to remember that this is an unverified historical claim, not hard proof. But wow, the translation of that message is nothing short of staggering. When translated into plain English, the text described a cache of wealth so incredibly massive, it's honestly a little hard to comprehend. It basically validated the wildest dreams of literally every treasure hunter out there. The decoded text spelled out the exact weight of the hoard. We are talking thousands of pounds of gold and silver, plus a massive, massive deposit of jewels on top of that. And all of this, the paper claimed, was resting safely in a stone-lined excavation perfectly camouflaged somewhere in the Virginia landscape, just waiting. But here's where things get really frustrating. The apparent success of cracking that second paper, it only made the remaining locked ciphers even more maddening for investigators. I mean, you logically think that if the Declaration of Independence unlocked the contents, it would obviously unlock the location and the names too, right? Nope, it didn't. The numbers in ciphers 1 and 3 did not correspond to the declaration at all. They just remained a tangled, impossible mess of digits. It really begs the question, why on earth would Beale use one specific key for the contents, but completely different, totally undiscovered keys for the location and the owners? And that contrast right there is the ultimate psychological trap. It is exactly why this story completely captivated America. Think about it. We supposedly know exactly what the treasure is, but the where and the who remain completely locked away from us. We've got the lock, but we're missing the keys. This bizarre dichotomy is precisely why stories of this buried treasure spread like absolute wildfire, capturing the imagination of the entire country. If these remaining ciphers are actually genuine, cracking them would literally rewrite history and unearth an absolute fortune. But as decades have turned into centuries, we are left with this haunting, deeply provocative question. Are we actually staring at the keys to a forgotten empire? Or did the Beale treasure never even exist in the first place? Could this actually just be the most brilliant, unsolved hoax in American history? So what do you think? Welcome back to another explainer. So in our last dive into the Beale ciphers, we saw how one incredibly complex message was allegedly decoded, revealing the staggering fortune of gold and silver hidden somewhere in Virginia. It's an amazing story, right? But here's the catch. If the tale is actually true, the absolute most important clues, the exact location of the vault and the names of the rightful owners, are still locked tightly inside two completely uncracked ciphers. So, you really have to ask, did Thomas J. Beale actually bury a massive fortune in Virginia? Now, this isn't just some random historical trivia. It is literally the hook to one of the greatest detective stories in American history. To find the truth, we need to dig deeply into the evidence, analyze the codes, and really question the very origins of the legend itself before we even think about grabbing our shovels. Let's get right into part 1, 2 unsolved ciphers. Here is the incredibly frustrating reality of the Beale Papers. Ciphers number 1 and 3 remain total mysteries. Because cipher number 2 was famously cracked using the Declaration of Independence, generations of amateur cryptographers just assumed the others absolutely had to be book ciphers too. And the search for a solution has been relentless. People have literally thrown everything at these codes. They run the numbers against other historical documents, foreign dictionaries, the Bible, famous American texts, you name it. They've looked for obscure numerical patterns and even run massive computer-assisted analyses. And yet, despite all of that, a universally accepted key remains entirely elusive. Moving on to part 2, the Virginia treasure hunt. Now, a locked code has never stopped a determined treasure hunter, right? The decoded text of cipher number 2 claimed the vault was in Bedford County, Virginia, which practically overnight turned this quiet area into ground zero for eager prospectors. But honestly, locating an 1800s treasure today is nearly impossible. First, you have to account for nearly 2 centuries of natural landscape changes and modern development. Then add in missing or destroyed historical records, wildly inaccurate 19th century maps, and decades of completely unreliable local gossip. When you combine all these factors together, just randomly digging in Bedford County is virtually a lost cause. Which brings us to part 3, tracing the story's origin. Since the physical trail is completely cold, we have to look back at the original documents themselves. The entire legend basically hinges on a local innkeeper named Robert Morris, who allegedly received a locked iron box directly from Thomas J. Beale right before he vanished. But the crucial point here is how these documents actually saw the light of day. They weren't released by a respected historical society or a museum. They were published in a mysterious anonymous pamphlet back in 1885. The author claimed they were acting on behalf of Morris, but their identity, it remains completely unknown. And that is a massive missing puzzle piece in the very foundation of this treasure map. And that leads us right into part 4, analyzing the hoax theory. We really need to take a step back here and objectively interrogate the source material. Could this entire Beale story have been meticulously fabricated? There is a stark, unavoidable contrast between the legend we love and the evidence we actually have. The legend tells this thrilling tale of complex ciphers and hidden gold, but the hard evidence? Well, it's problematic. There's a total lack of independent contemporary records proving Beale even existed. We have that highly unusual, anonymous pamphlet origin story, and only one cipher that actually produces meaningful text. Now, while this doesn't mathematically prove it's a hoax, it certainly creates some serious historical skepticism. Let's neutrally weigh the historical evidence against the most popular theories out there. First up, the already recovered theory. This perfectly explains why nothing is there now, but the glaring weakness is that there is zero historical record of anyone suddenly finding immense wealth in the area. Second, the document's lost or damaged theory explains the unsolvable ciphers, but honestly, it's completely impossible to prove or disprove. Third, the idea that a different key is needed definitely keeps the hope of discovery alive, yet exhaustive searches have yielded absolutely nothing. Fourth is the financial or literary hoax theory, which fits the lack of independent evidence perfectly, but kind of ignores the fact that the decoded cipher 2 is a remarkably complex piece of cryptographic work. And finally, the theory that the treasure never existed is the simplest explanation, but again, it completely dismisses the intricate work required to create that 1885 pamphlet in the first place. Now, you might be wondering, why can't we just use modern technology to crack this case? I mean, computers today are amazing. They can test enormous numbers of possible keys and detect mathematical anomalies in absolute milliseconds. But there's a massive difference between finding a mathematical pattern and finding a historically convincing solution. A computer just cannot automatically prove which specific historical key was genuinely intended by an author way back in the 1820s. Proving intent requires real historical context, not just raw computing power. Finally, part 5, the ultimate unsolved mystery. Despite over a century of digging, decoding, and debating, we always have to return to our central question. Did Thomas J. Beale really bury a fortune? To date, no verified discovery of this alleged treasure has ever been made. Honestly, the true artifact might just be the story itself. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't the physical location of the gold, but the enduring, meticulously crafted origin of the legend. Someone created a tale so mathematically complex and perfectly balanced between hope and impossibility that it has literally survived for generations. Perhaps a fortune still lies hidden beneath the Virginia soil. Perhaps the Beale ciphers contain a secret that has simply never been understood. Or perhaps the greatest treasure was the mystery itself, a story powerful enough to survive for generations. Whatever the truth, the Beale ciphers remain one of America's most fascinating unsolved mysteries. This has been Mystery Vault. Until next time, keep questioning history.